If your emergency fund is sitting in the wrong place, one bad month could destroy your finances faster than you think. Not a bad year, not a recession, not some once-in-a-lifetime disaster, just one bad month. One car repair, one medical bill, one delayed paycheck, one rent increase, one emergency trip, one surprise expense you never saw coming. And suddenly, the person who thought they were doing okay is using a credit card to survive, juggling bills, skipping payments, and wondering how everything fell apart so fast. That is how financial stress begins for most people. Not with some huge dramatic event, but with one ordinary emergency and no system in place to handle it. And the worst part, most people think they have an emergency fund problem because they have not saved enough money. But that is not the biggest mistake. The real mistake is much more dangerous. They keep their emergency fund where it is too easy to touch. That is the mistake. And that mistake can quietly ruin you in a single month. Because when emergency money feels like regular money, it usually gets spent like regular money. That extra cash in checking starts to look like money for takeout, for shopping, for a quick upgrade, for a short trip, for a small reward after a long week, for all the little things that never feel dangerous in the moment. And then one day, a real emergency happens and the money is gone. That is the trap. A lot of people believe they have an emergency fund just because they technically saved something. But if the money is mixed in with your everyday spending, it is not truly protected. It is exposed, and exposed money disappears. That is what makes this so serious. Because the purpose of an emergency fund is not just to exist. Its job is to protect your life when life becomes unpredictable. It is supposed to stand between you and debt, between you and panic, between you and the kind of desperate financial decisions people make when they feel trapped. When that protection fails, everything gets more expensive. A car repair is no longer just a repair. Now it becomes interest on a credit card. A medical bill is no longer just a bill. Now it becomes stress, late fees, and maybe money taken from rent or groceries. A gap in income is no longer just temporary. Now it becomes a full financial emergency. And this is exactly why so many people feel like they are always one step away from falling behind, because they are not financially protected. They are financially exposed. And if you are exposed long enough, eventually life finds the weak spot. That is why the smartest thing you can do is stop thinking of an emergency fund as extra money. It is not extra money. It is not free money. It is not bonus money. It is not money waiting for a better use. It already has a job. Its job is to protect your stability. And if you do not treat it like that, you are one bad month away from learning the hard way why it matters. Now let's be honest. Most people do not ruin their emergency fund all at once. They do it little by little. They borrow from it and promise themselves they will put it back. They dip into it for things that are kind of important. They convince themselves they will rebuild it next month. They keep it in the same account as bills and spending, so it slowly loses its identity. And that is how financial protection gets erased. Quietly, casually, without alarm bells, until a real emergency shows up. And then suddenly, the truth is impossible to ignore. You are not prepared. That is why this conversation matters so much. Because financial peace does not come from pretending everything is okay. It comes from creating distance between you and chaos. And an emergency fund only works when that distance is real. That means your emergency money needs separation. It needs boundaries. It needs rules. It should not live in the same mental category as your normal spending. Because once your brain sees it as available, it becomes vulnerable. And vulnerable money gets used. This is where most people get personal finance completely wrong. They obsess over how much to save without fixing how the money is stored, protected, and mentally labeled. But psychology matters. If your emergency fund feels reachable every time you log into your bank account, you are far more likely to touch it. If it feels like part of your spending pool, your discipline has to fight temptation every single week. That is exhausting. And eventually, temptation wins. So the goal is not just to save. The goal is to protect what you save. That is what makes the difference between people who stay stable and people who keep starting over. And before I go further, I want to ask you something. Be honest. If you had to choose, what is harder for you right now? Saving the money in the first place or leaving it alone once it is there? Comment your answer below. I really want to know how people are struggling with this, because most people are dealing with one of those two problems. And if you want more videos like this, real personal finance advice that actually helps you protect your money and avoid expensive mistakes, subscribe to the channel right now. This channel is for people who want to get smarter with money in the real world, not just hear motivational quotes. Now here is the good news. Fixing this mistake does not require you to become rich overnight. It does not require a massive income. It does not require perfect discipline. It does not require some genius financial strategy. It requires one mindset shift. Your emergency fund is not there to make life more fun. It is there to make life less dangerous. That is a completely different role. And once you understand that, your behavior starts to change. You stop seeing that money as optional. You stop seeing it as flexible. You stop seeing it as a convenience. You start seeing it as a shield. And a shield only works if you do not keep taking pieces off it every week. That is why every strong emergency fund needs three things. First, it needs separation. If it sits in your everyday account, it will always be under pressure. The more visible and available it feels, the easier it becomes to justify touching it. Second, it needs a clear purpose. Not money for anything important, not money just in case, but true emergency money. That means job loss, medical issues, urgent repairs, essential bills during a hard month, real life disruption, not wants, not upgrades, not shopping, not emotional spending. Third, it needs respect. You have to treat that money like it is protecting your future self. Because it is protecting the version of you who gets blindsided, the version of you who has a hard month, the version of you who needs options instead of panic. That future version of you is depending on what you do right now. And this is where real financial maturity begins, not when you start looking wealthy, not when you buy better things, not when you impress people, not when you finally feel successful on the outside. Real financial maturity begins when you build systems that keep you safe when nobody is watching. That is what an emergency fund is. It is quiet. It is boring. It does not look glamorous, but it is one of the strongest financial moves you can make. Because when life goes wrong, cash buys time. Cash buys breathing room. Cash buys better decisions. Cash buys dignity. Cash buys the ability to handle a problem without turning it into a long-term disaster. And that is what most people are really missing. Not money alone, but margin. Margin is what keeps one bad month from becoming one bad year. Without margin, every surprise feels like a crisis. With margin, a crisis becomes a problem you can solve. That is the difference. So if you take one message from this video, let it be this. Do not just build an emergency fund. Protect it. Give it a separate home. Give it strict rules. Give it a real identity. Because if your emergency fund feels like spending money, it will disappear like spending money. And when the bad month comes, and at some point you do not want to find out too late that your safety net was never really there. 1 month can absolutely ruin people, but one smart financial system can stop that from happening. Build the buffer, protect your peace, create distance between you and financial chaos, and make sure the money that is supposed to save you is still there when you finally need saving.